Imagine pulling into your driveway after a long day, the hum of your sleek Tesla fading into silence, only to spot a nosy neighbor lurking in the shadows, her eyes narrowed with unspoken judgment. This wasn't just any complaint. It was a spark that ignited a firestorm of racial tension in a quiet suburban enclave. Paul, a hardworking engineer of Asian descent, thought he'd finally achieved the American dream with his eco-friendly home upgrade. But when HOA Karen branded his simple Tesla charger as forbidden industrial equipment, it exposed a deeper prejudice lurking beneath the surface. What started as a petty dispute escalated into a battle for justice, where the law became his unlikely weapon. Stick around to see how Paul turned the tables and made them pay. In the sun-drenched suburbs of a gated community in Southern California, where manicured lawns and white picket fences masked underlying divisions, Paul had carved out a life of quiet ambition. As a first-generation immigrant from Vietnam, he'd risen through the ranks of a tech firm, his days filled with circuit boards and innovation. His modest two-story home, bought after years of saving, represented stability, a far cry from the crowded apartments of his youth. Paul was the type who waved to neighbors, mowed his lawn on weekends, and dreamed of a sustainable future. That's why, when he decided to install a Tesla charger in his garage, it felt like a natural step forward. The electric vehicle was more than a car. It was a symbol of progress, reducing his carbon footprint and embracing the green revolution sweeping the nation. The Neighborhood's Homeowners Association, or HOA, enforced rules with an iron fist. But Paul had dotted every I and crossed every T. He submitted permits, consulted experts, and ensured the charger blended seamlessly into his property. No unsightly wires, no disruption to the aesthetic harmony. Yet, whispers of unease began to circulate. Karen, the self-appointed guardian of the community's standards, lived just across the street. A retiree with time on her hands, she patrolled the sidewalks like a sentinel, her gaze often lingering on homes owned by families who didn't quite fit her vision of suburban perfection. Paul noticed her stares, the way she'd pause during her evening walks, her lips pursing as if tasting something sour. He shrugged it off at first, attributing it to typical neighborly quirks. But deep down, a nagging sense of isolation grew. Paul was one of the few Asian faces in a predominantly white enclave, and he'd felt the subtle undercurrents of exclusion before. Little did he know, the charger would become the flashpoint, unraveling a web of bias that had simmered for years. As the installation day arrived, with workers quietly mounting the device, Karen's shadow loomed larger, setting the stage for a confrontation that would test Paul's resolve. The trouble began subtly, like a storm cloud gathering on the horizon. Days after the charger's installation, Paul returned home to find an official-looking notice taped to his door. A violation citation from the HOA, accusing him of installing unauthorized industrial equipment that allegedly violated community bylaws. The language was sharp, clinical, painting the charger as some hulking machine that threatened property values and safety. Paul's heart sank as he read it, his mind racing through the implications. He knew the rules inside out. Electric vehicle chargers were explicitly allowed under state green energy incentives, and his setup was residential grade, no different from a standard outlet. But the citation demanded immediate removal, with fines looming if he resisted. As Paul delved deeper, the racial undercurrents became impossible to ignore. Karen, it turned out, had spearheaded the complaint, rallying a small cadre of like-minded neighbors through whispered emails and backyard gatherings. Her fixation wasn't just on the charger, it was on Paul himself. In this affluent bubble, where diversity was touted in brochures but rarely embraced, Paul's success as an Asian professional stirred unease. He'd overheard murmurs at community events, subtle digs about outsiders bringing foreign changes, code for the xenophobia that festered beneath polite smiles. Karen's claim twisted facts. She exaggerated the charger's size, likening it to factory machinery, implying it was unfit for their refined neighborhood. It was a dog whistle, echoing historical prejudices that viewed immigrants as disruptors, their innovations as threats rather than assets. Paul's initial response was measured but firm. He pored over HOA documents late into the night, his desk littered with legal printouts and energy codes. The emotional toll mounted. Sleepless nights replaying scenarios where his hard-earned home slipped away. He felt the weight of generational struggles, memories of his parents' sacrifices fleeing war-torn Vietnam, only to face discrimination in their new land. This wasn't just about a charger. It was an assault on his dignity, a reminder that no matter his achievements, some saw him as lesser. Tension built as anonymous notes appeared in his mailbox, veiled threats urging compliance. While Karen's surveillance intensified, she'd park her car nearby, watching his every move. Paul reached out to allies, consulting lawyers and fellow minorities in the community who shared similar tales of biased enforcement. One neighbor confided about denied garden permits. Another about scrutinized holiday decorations, all tied to skin color or heritage. The injustice deepened when fines started accruing, draining Paul's savings and forcing him to delay family plans. Emotional strain rippled through his life. Stress lines etched deeper on his face, his once optimistic demeanor shadowed by doubt. Yet, amid the rising pressure, a spark of defiance ignited. Paul documented everything. Photos of the charger, comparisons to similar setups in whiter households that went unchallenged, and evidence of Karen's selective outrage. The narrative of bias unfolded like a tightening coil, each revelation heightening the stakes. Would he back down or fight back against a system rigged to silence voices like his? The air thickened with anticipation, the suburban facade cracking under the strain of exposed prejudice. The confrontation reached its boiling point on a crisp autumn evening as twilight cast long shadows over the neighborhood. Paul, armed with a binder of meticulously gathered evidence, attended the HOA board meeting in the community center. A sterile room filled with folding chairs and flickering fluorescent lights. The air was thick with unspoken hostility, eyes darting toward him as he took his seat. Karen sat at the front, her posture rigid, exuding an aura of unchallenged authority. This was the arena where bias is often hid behind procedural jargon, but Paul was prepared, his pulse pounding with a mix of fear and resolve. As the agenda turned to his case, the room's tension peaked like a wave cresting before the crash. Paul presented his defense methodically. State laws affirming residential EV chargers as essential for environmental progress. Photos proving his installation's compliance, and damning comparisons to untouched setups in other homes. But the true revelation came when he unveiled records of Karen's pattern, emails laced with derogatory undertones about those people, altering the neighborhood's character, her complaints disproportionately targeting minority residents. The evidence laid bare her motives, not genuine concern for rules, but a deep-seated racism that weaponized the HOA against anyone who didn't mirror her worldview. Emotions surged in that moment. Paul's hands trembled slightly as he flipped through pages, the weight of inherited struggles fueling his stand. Karen's facade cracked, her usual composure faltered under the scrutiny, the room's murmurs shifting from support to unease. It was the emotional pinnacle, a raw exposure of injustice where Paul's quiet strength clashed against entrenched prejudice. The board, cornered by irrefutable facts and the specter of legal repercussions, deliberated in hushed tones. For Paul, this wasn't just victory in a dispute. It was a cathartic unmasking, the climax of a battle that affirmed his right to belong. As the meeting adjourned, the air hummed with unresolved electricity, the scales tipping toward justice in a way that would redefine the community's hidden divides. In the aftermath, the HOA's decision came swiftly, a reluctant concession that echoed through the neighborhood like a long overdue reckoning. The board revoked the citation, acknowledging the charger's legality and dismissing Karen's claims as unfounded. More than that, they compensated Paul for the accrued fines and even covered his electric bill for a year, a symbolic reparation for the harassment endured. Karen faded into the background, her influence diminished as whispers of her bias spread, prompting quiet apologies from neighbors who'd stood by silently. For Paul, the resolution brought a profound sense of empowerment, transforming victimhood into advocacy. He channeled the experience into community workshops, educating others on fair housing laws and the subtle faces of discrimination. His home, once a site of contention, became a beacon of resilience. The Tesla charger humming quietly, a testament to progress unchained by prejudice. The emotional scars lingered, but they fueled growth, reminding him of the strength in his heritage. This story, drawn from the real struggles of countless individuals facing racial injustice in everyday spaces, underscores a vital truth. Bias thrives in silence, but truth and tenacity can dismantle it. Paul's journey isn't unique. It's a mirror to systemic inequities that persist in HOAs, workplaces, and beyond, where rules are bent to exclude. Yet, it offers hope, proof that standing firm, armed with knowledge, can shift the balance. What if the next Karen moment happens in your life? Will you recognize the injustice and fight back? Share your stories in the comments below. Let's build a community that calls out bias and celebrates diversity. If this resonated, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more tales of triumph over adversity. Together, we can charge toward a more equitable world.